Let's unpack all of this now with Javier Farje. He's a Latin America analyst and he joins us now from London. Welcome back to the program, Javier. There's still clearly a lot of anger over last week's ousting of the former president, Pedro Castillo. Why hasn't the promise of early elections satisfied protesters?
Well, the problem is that apart from the fact that some people are protesting for Mr. Castillo, most of the protests are because they want early elections. Most of them are because of early elections. Now, the President Boluarte, Dina Boluarte, has sent a proposal for early elections for April 2024 to Congress, and Congress will have to debate and approve this proposal. If the Congress doesn't approve this proposal, the situation could get even worse than it is now. As you explained in the introduction to this piece, 7 people have died and these protests have spread out. Now, most of the protests are not necessarily asking for Castillo to be reinstated, but to close Congress. We mustn't forget that even before Castillo was sacked, if you like, Congress was even less popular than Castillo, 17% of popularity, which is a very, very low thing. And that hasn't changed with the change of government. So what Ms. Boluarte has done, the President Boluarte has done, is put the ball on the court of Congress and say, look, we need early election because people want early election. You have to approve this. And Congress will have to do that. They've been reluctant until now to do that because many of the current members of Congress would not be able to stand again because of a law that prevents them from standing for the second time. So they have been reluctant. They will have to accept this proposal. Now, many of the people wanted to close parliament. The president will not do that because that's one of the reasons why Castillo lost power in the first place, that he will try to close the Congress. So it hasn't satisfied people because many of the grievances as well are all grievances that go before the sacking of Mr. Castillo. Many of these countryside cities, provinces have been suffering neglect, have been have been abandoned by the state, and many people are angry about that. So this is an accumulation of factors which this situation with Mr. Castillo has triggered. This is the latest episode, if you like, chapter in a long history of marginalization and abandonment. And that's one of the reasons why these people are protesting, because they want something to be done about the situation, poverty, lack of economic development, etc., etc. So basically, we will have to see whether Congress approves this proposal by President Boluarte. I don't think they have any choice but to do that and see whether that's going to help calm the situation down a bit.
Pedro Castillo was very much an outsider when he became president last July. He was a former school teacher, the country's first indigenous person to become president as well. But his election victory really did shake the political and business establishment. So there was a lot of hope put in his leadership, particularly among the poor rural voters. So what went wrong for him? Was he just too much of a threat for the political establishment?
You're absolutely right. He was popular, although the country was divided because he won by just a bit more than 50% of the vote. I mean that Peru was divided in the very middle. He was an outsider, that's true. The hostility from the establishment, from what I call the white Lima elite, the elite of Lima, were against him from the very moment he was proclaimed president of Peru. So in that respect, the hostility went on, and Congress he never had the majority in Congress, and that hostility continued throughout all his period. What happened with Mr. Castillo is that he did not fulfill the promises that he actually made. Many people in his close circle enriched themselves with projects. And Mr. Castillo is accused by the Attorney General of being the head of this criminal enterprise, something which actually they haven't proven that. So Mr. Castillo lost his political identity. Nobody knew whether he was still a left wing, a right wing. He lost his political identity, and there was a great deal of inefficiency in the way he ran government, which is the reason why many people started to be very unhappy. And of course, Congress took advantage of that, and they established a policy of hostility. They indicted and they impeached minister after minister after minister after minister. And that made it very difficult for Mr. Castillo as well to rule the country because Congress was against him all the time. So it was a combination of factors that made Mr. Castillo fail in many ways to fulfill the promises that he made to many people in the countryside. You're absolutely right. He was a former trade union leader, a teacher from the countryside, the second indigenous president, because President Alejandro Toledo was actually the first one. But he really annoyed this white middle class elite in Lima who would never accept somebody from the provinces to be the president. It was a combination of factors, and Mr. Castillo unfortunately did not help with the level of incompetence that he showed during his government. But at the same time, Congress was very hostile, and they never let him rule. That combination of factors made the situation even worse.
Okay, Javier Farje, really appreciate your analysis as always. Thank you for joining us.